ready to unlock a language that's more than just a pretty sound. We're diving deep into the world of Slovene today, and you've brought us some really fascinating material, historical tidbits, linguistic analyses, even a few grammar rules that, well, they sound like they're from another planet.
Sounds like we have all the ingredients for a thrilling deep dive then.
Absolutely. So tell me what makes Slovene so special. I read somewhere that the first written words in Slovene appeared in a German poem, which isn't exactly what I expected for a language with such a unique identity.
That's a fantastic place to start. It really highlights how Slovene's history is woven into the fabric of its surrounding languages. That poem you mentioned, well, it documented a Slovene peasant revolt in the 16th century, and those words, Stara Pravda, meaning old justice, became a powerful symbol of resistance.
Old justice. It does have a certain ring to it, doesn't it? Almost poetic. It makes you wonder about the dynamics at play, a dominant language capturing a moment of rebellion in another.
It speaks volumes about how languages interact and influence each other, especially in regions with rich and, let's face it, often turbulent histories, and Slovenia, as you know, sits at a crossroads of cultures.
Right. Bordered by Italy, Austria, Hungary. You can definitely hear those influences in the language, even if you don't speak a word of it.
Precisely. Over the centuries, Slovene has borrowed words from German, Italian, and even Serbo-Croatian. But it hasn't just absorbed these words wholesale. It categorizes them based on their level of assimilation. Like pika for pizza, a fully integrated loanword, versus something like Shakespeare, which is spelled the same but grammatically treated as a Slovene word. It's fascinating how languages develop these intricate systems for incorporating outside influences.
It's like Slovene has its own passport control for vocabulary, deciding which words get full citizenship and which ones are still just visiting.
Exactly. And this borrowing goes beyond just individual words. For a good chunk of the early 20th century, the official language of Yugoslavia, which included Slovenia, was termed Serbo-Croato-Slovene.
Serbo-Croato-Slovene. Okay, that's definitely a mouthful. But it sounds like it was mainly Serbo-Croatian in disguise.
You're right. It had a significant impact on Slovene's development, even though within Slovenia itself, Slovene was still used in education and administration.
So you had this linguistic tug of war happening with the official language on one side and the language of everyday life on the other. That must have been a fascinating time for language evolution. It really highlights how language is never static, right? It's always adapting, absorbing, reflecting the world around it.
Absolutely. And that brings us to what I think is one of the most fascinating things about Slovene. It's incredible diversity. We're not talking just a few regional accents here either. There are, depending on how you classify them, anywhere from 7 to 50 distinct dialects.
Wow, 50 dialects in a country with a population smaller than some cities I've been to. That's a lot of linguistic variation for such a small geographical area.
There's a Slovene proverb that captures this beautifully. Every village has its own voice.
I love that. Every village has its own voice. It's poetic, but I imagine it could also lead to some, well, interesting conversations. Have you ever encountered a dialect that threw you for a loop?
Thankfully, most Slovene dialects are mutually intelligible. It's more about nuances and local flavor, although there are exceptions. The Prekmurji and Riesian dialects, for example, are so distinct they have their own writing systems.
Wait, their own writing systems. Now that's dedication. It sounds like even for native speakers, navigating the world of Slovene dialects can be an adventure.
It certainly can be. But those nuances and variations are part of what makes the language so rich and interesting to study. And speaking of interesting, we haven't even touched on one of the things that makes Slovene truly stand out. It's grammar.
Oh, I've heard whispers, something about a dual number. Is it as intriguing as it sounds?
It is intriguing, to say the least. You see, Slovene has this wonderful quirk, a specific form for talking about two of something. Not one, not three, but two. We call it the dual number.
Okay, that's just cool. So instead of saying, I have 2 cats, a Slovene speaker would use this special dual form of the verb.
Exactly. It's like the grammar itself acknowledges the significance of pairs.
It makes you wonder how that kind of grammatical feature shapes the way people think about numbers and quantities. It's like having a built-in awareness of duality, you know? Do many languages do that?
You're right, it's a fascinating thought. And no, the dual number is quite rare, especially among Indo-European languages. Slovene shares this feature with a handful of other Slavic languages like Polish and Sorbian, kind of a relic of their shared linguistic ancestry.
A relic of the past, still going strong. And I'm guessing that's not the only grammatical adventure Slovene has in store. What about those cases I've heard so much about?
Ah, yes, the cases. Slovene has 6 cases: nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, locative, and instrumental. Don't worry, I'm not going to quiz you on them.
6 cases. English can barely handle its 2. So how does this case system actually work in practice?
Imagine cases as a way of showing the role a noun plays in a sentence, who's doing the action, who's receiving it, and so on. Take the word cat, for example. In Slovene, depending on the case, you might say maka, mashi, machki, and so on. The ending of the word changes depending on its function in the sentence.
So it's like each case gives the word a slightly different outfit to wear depending on the occasion. It does sound a bit like a grammatical workout.
You could say that, but here's where things get really interesting. While Slovene loves its cases, it has absolutely no definite or indefinite articles. No the or a.
Wait, hold on. No the or a. How do you even form a sentence without those?
Takes some getting used to, but essentially the meaning is conveyed through context and word endings. Instead of the boat, you just say, well, boat, barca. The ending tells you it's singular and feminine, and whether it's the boat or a boat is clear from what's being said.
So it's all about precision with those word endings. You've got to pack a lot of information into those final syllables. And I'm guessing that's where things can get tricky for language learners.
You're catching on quickly. Yes, mastering those subtle nuances of case and context can be one of the most challenging aspects of learning Slovene, but it also adds to the language's beauty and complexity.
It's like a linguistic puzzle, where each piece has to fit perfectly to create the full picture.
Precisely. And speaking of fitting in, there's another aspect of Slovene grammar that often trips up learners. The TV distinction.
Oh, right. The formal versus informal you. That always makes me think of those awkward moments when you accidentally use the wrong level of formality with someone. I once called a waiter tu instead of vous in a Parisian cafe, and, well, let's just say I didn't get the best service after that.
It happens to the best of us. But yes, in Slovene, choosing between T for informal and V for formal is crucial. You wouldn't want to address your boss with the same level of casualness as your childhood friend.
Definitely not a recipe for a smooth interaction. It's amazing how language reflects those social hierarchies and customs, isn't it?
Absolutely. And here's a fascinating tidbit. While the TV distinction is still very much alive, there used to be an even more formal way of addressing someone in Slovene.
More formal than vires. Okay, I'm all ears. What did they use?
Believe it or not, they used the third person plural. They.
They. So instead of would you like some tea, you'd say would they like some tea?
Exactly. It seems incredibly indirect to us, but it was considered the height of politeness in certain contexts.
Wow, I can't imagine that catching on these days. But it does make you wonder what linguistic etiquette will look like in the future. Will we all be speaking in emojis and abbreviations?
Only time will tell. But while the way we use language might evolve, the fundamental elements, those building blocks of grammar and vocabulary, tend to endure.
Right, like those borrowed words we talked about earlier. Speaking of which, how did Slovene end up with its writing system? I know it uses the Latin alphabet, but is there more to the story?
You're right. There's always a fascinating backstory when it comes to alphabets. Yes, Slovene uses the Latin alphabet, but with a twist. It includes those special characters we see in many Slavic languages. Sha and she. And believe it or not, this alphabet wasn't originally intended for Slovene.
Oh, tell me more. It's not every day you hear about a language borrowing an entire writing system.
It's true. It was developed in the mid-19th century by a Croatian linguist, Judovit Gaj. His goal was to create a standardized alphabet for Serbo-Croatian. But it was quickly adopted by Slovene intellectuals who saw its potential for unifying their own language.
So Slovene's linguistic journey is intertwined not just with its immediate neighbors, but with the broader story of Slavic languages finding their voice in a changing world.
Exactly. It speaks to this shared cultural and linguistic heritage that transcends national borders. But, as with any borrowed system, there are bound to be a few quirks.
Like what?
Well, while the alphabet itself is fairly straightforward, the relationship between spelling and pronunciation in Slovene can be, well, a bit tricky, especially when it comes to vowels.
Oh, vowels. Always a source of mystery and intrigue in the world of language. What makes them so challenging in Slovene?
Unlike some languages where every vowel has a consistent sound, Slovene vowels can be a bit ambiguous. The same vowel can be pronounced in different ways depending on the word and its context.
So how do you know which pronunciation is the right one? It sounds like you'd need a secret decoder ring just to read a menu.
Context is everything. You have to pay close attention to the surrounding words and the overall meaning of the sentence to decipher those vowel sounds.
Do you have any examples of words where a slight change in vowel pronunciation completely alters the meaning?
Plenty. Take the word goal, for example. Pronounced one way, it means naked, but with a subtle shift in emphasis, it means goal, like in sports.
Oh no, that could lead to some embarrassing misunderstandings. I can imagine someone cheering goal at a soccer match only to be met with very confused stares.
I wouldn't want to be caught in that situation. It highlights how important those subtle nuances of pronunciation can be.
It certainly does. So in a way, mastering Slovene is about more than just memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. It's about developing an ear for those subtle variations in sound and meaning. It's like learning a new way to listen.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about tuning into the music of the language, those subtle shifts in tone and emphasis that convey so much meaning.
It makes you appreciate the sheer complexity and beauty of languages like Slovene, doesn't it? It's been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least.
It certainly has. And for those eager to continue exploring, it makes you wonder, how will a language as nuanced and historically intertwined as Slovene continue to evolve in our increasingly interconnected world? What will it mean for Slovene to preserve its unique identity while embracing the inevitable flow of global communication?
It's a question worth pondering, not just for Slovene, but for all languages navigating the complexities of the 21st century. It seems our deep dive into Slovene has uncovered not just linguistic facts, but some pretty profound questions as well. Food for thought, wouldn't you say? Until next time on the deep dive, keep those language questions coming.